All right, shall I proceed, I guess? All right, so what this is basically says it's when I was in Baja, I was there 4 years ago, and I was there 3 years ago as well. So basically, a lot of this is like a tour. I mean, there's some taxonomy and there's pictures of plants and things like that, but what I wanted to do was set it up so that you'd have a feel for starting out in the north near Tijuana and driving to the south of Los Cabos. So you'll see some of the same plants again, but as I said, the whole idea was just to give you an idea of what it's like to drive through Baja. Now, we refer to it as Baja and Baja California, but in actuality, if you're down there, that can be confusing because the top half is called Baja California and the bottom half is called Baja California Sur. So if you're ever doing research or going into the scientific sites, you have to distinguish between which parts of Baja you're going into. This would be if you were on GBIF or iNaturalist. I'm not going to do a lot about Baja itself. Basically, down the middle, there's a mountain chains, and they get fairly high. I'm not sure if it quite makes 10,000 feet, but there are a lot of high mountains, and they're more or less in the middle, but over to the Sea of Cortez, which is the body of water to the east. And it's a mixture, other than the mountains, it's a mixture of flat and hilly. In some places, it's absolutely flat, and other places you're going through hilly, like the foothills out west. There's also a lot along the edge in the Sea of Cortez. There's a lot of small islands which have ecological significance because some of them are have plants that are endemic. They only exist on those islands. And there's a single main road that basically runs from the north to the south. Now, when I did it, it was gravel. I'm presuming by now it's paved. So just very quickly, if you want to describe the climate, it's hot and dry. And the whole area tends to lean towards the desertic. Even if you're in an area that looks like it's a forest, it'll still be filled with cacti and succulents. And if you look, you can see that the precipitation is only about 10 inches or less. And then during the summer, the temperatures will be, during the winter, over 50. And then during the summer, it gets down to just below 70. So when we went through, it was about 90 degrees. We went through in May, actually, and it was pretty hot then. Now, in terms of information, there's a few basic books, and I brought a lot of them here. People can't see it, but one of them is this well, Jack called it a brick. It's a really big volume, but this Wiggins book basically is a full taxonomic key to all the plants in Baja. Now, it's fairly old. I don't think they've done a new one. The middle one I found very handy because it's based on the common plants. And if you're really interested in cacti and succulents, you definitely have to get the Pilbeam book. And I have those here as well afterwards if there's time, if you want to take a look at some of them. Now, I won't get into, this fairly small, but what I did is I took a lot of the books, what Pilbeam had listed in his, and he listed succulents, like he had agave, as well as some cacti. And I fed that information into GBIF, extracted it, and did some data analysis on it to see what they have listed there. Yeah, so basically, I picked up all the cacti and any of the succulents that were in Pilbeam's book, although there are other non-cacti succulents that I know and that I've seen. I also dropped it the uncertainty meters, if it was more than 35 kilometers. For a lot of plants, people don't actually want you to know where they are, so they'll add 10 kilometers or 1 kilometer to the location. And the real location will be private or hidden. It still exists, but you don't get to see it. So because I was trying to give some sense of location, I dropped the ones that were really off. And in GBIF, there's 40,000 occurrences. There was 10 families, succulent families, 21 cacti genera, and 12 succulent genera, and 200 species of succulents altogether. we'll skip through that. So in terms of the families, a lot of these you'll recognize. But you notice the cacti have 130 species, and that's for such a small area. Now, these are recorded occurrences. Like if you went to Bolivia, all of Bolivia only has about 130 species. So if you're interested in cacti, to me, Baja is like the mecca of the place to go to see a lot of cacti in a short time, and a lot of other succulents as well. And if you're in the north, they're really easy to see and find because it's much more open than the south, which is more wooded. Now, in terms of the species, you can see that in terms of the non-cactaceae succulent species, that Aglaya has an awful lot of them. And the other ones have just a few that are scattered through. Agave also has quite a few. If you look at the Cactaceae, you get, it seems to be everywhere. You get Cylindropuntia and Opuntia that always have a lot, and Mammillaria always has a lot. Acanthoserius, I think that's an introduced one.
What is the species of Echinopsis?
Sorry?
What is the species of Echinopsis?
That I don't know. But if we get to Google Earth, I can find out and look at it. I did find one actually when I was looking at Canada, and they had a wild Echinopsis listed in Canada. So I flaked that. It's not really wild. I haven't seen any yet. They may exist.
But that's
The thing about KDIP, on the one hand, it's really powerful because you get to see a lot of data, but at the same time, you have to be cautious. So it's really good for getting a sense, but if you're doing serious studies, it's only part of what you'd be looking at. And actually, I do talk about some of the validity because it's a record of occurrence. All it is what's there. And these of access is important. Like I found when I looked at like Bolivia and Peru, around the cities, there was a lot of occurrences. But if you went up to like 12,000 feet up in the mountains of Bolivia, all of a sudden the occurrences drop. Now that could be because there's not a lot of cacti there, or there's not a lot of people who go there. Now I use GBIF instead of iNaturalist because it contains scientific research data, includes herbaria, and I have those in Google Earth as well. So people scan in their herbaria, and you can see types like from 150 years ago, when some of the names that you would recognize if you know some of the plant history. But it also includes the iNaturalist research grade, which is the higher quality. But unfortunately, in iNaturalist, you only need 2 people to agree on the ID. So if it's an uncommon species, you might get people who agree on the common one, even though it's the uncommon one. It's kind of a vote. Now, if people disagree, then you need a higher number who agree, but it's not based on experience or expertise. But that having been said, from what I see on most of the research grade wild, it's accurate. Now, the location I mentioned, people can obscure it, but as well, if you're looking like mine, if I move mine up from 1983 and I put in the location, I can only put in an approximation. And it also depends on the person and their GPS as far as the validity that you get out of it. All right, so that's the end of the actual PowerPoint. This is a silhouette of Bourgeois. I have 3 favorite plants, and this was the one plant that I wanted to see when I was down there. And part of it is it's almost ghostly. Like this is a black and white image, but the silhouetting that you get late in the evening or early in the morning is actually quite fantastic. All right, now I'm going to switch to, hopefully, and folks, these things at the bottom are very small. All right, I'm going to do something different to get into it. All right, can you see a red Volkswagen Rabbit? No?
We're still seeing this.
No.
I guess I'm gonna have to reshare somehow. Glad I may need your assistance if I'm having trouble. So that's what I want to share, but I'm out of the Zoom and.
No, you have to go back to Zoom, share your screen.
Yeah, but I can't get back in.
No. Just click over here.
Over here?
Just
Oh,
minimize.
maybe up here. Show small active.
No, this is just the list of participants. You have to go back to your original. Just, can you just click down?
I don't see it. In fact, it's.
This is just a snapshot. Just minimize this one.
All right, minimize.
Minimize everything. Just make sure that you have only Zoom open.
Here's the bug.
Okay, now they can see.
Oh, it's not a bug.
Right, now I have to get back there.
Who's that?
You have to.
Yeah, I'll just close that one. All right, you got it now?
Yes.
Good, excellent. All right. So back to the red Volkswagen Rabbit. Now, when we rented this car, we had to upgrade from the mid-size car to the full-size car to get this because they thought a mid-size car was a Volkswagen Beetle. And obviously no air conditioning. I traveled with my parents through Baja. My dad was a professor at the university in horticulture, so he was the one who really got me interested in plants. So this is, I was well known throughout university and people refer to this, oh, you're not seeing the change. Gabor? It's not changing.
You have two screens, remember?
Yeah, I closed one of them. I closed one of them down.
You are trying to change the one now. Definitely not this one.
Let's see.
Where is the second one?
It's gone.
Where is it? Oh, let's go here. Okay, now go to share screen. Where is it?
I am screen sharing.
Okay, but if you pause and try again, but choose another screen, just resume.
You share.
Yeah.
Ah, there we go. No, let's try the other one. No. I'm gonna stop.
Nathan suggested you open it up in photo viewer. Would that help?
That's what I have it open in.
Oh,
Well, it's one of the Windows one. I haven't been able to share
Just
before.
click on resume. Share.
Resume share.
Oh,
There we go. Let's see if I can change. Excellent. I'm very happy. All right, so even though I talk about how Baja being very hot and dry, there was a lot of rivers, a lot of dried up riverbeds and a lot of water. And the road would hit on the ocean on one side of the Sea of Cortez on the other side. This plant is called, it's Rus integrifolia, and it's also called the lemonade berry because you can suck on the fruit if you're thirsty or make lemonade. Now, when I was down there, I didn't know what it was, so I wasn't going to try and eat the fruit. So there's castor bean, which I wouldn't have expected in the desertic regions, but oh, good. I'm glad everything's still changing. So this is mammillaria. Now, Baja has a lot of mammillarias, and the only one that I really know is mammillaria dioica. So that's what I'm going to call all the mammillarias. But so my taxonomy, I do know some of the things about the plants, but after, if you have any corrections, changes, or if you know something, just let me know. Now this one, I'm really not sure what it is because I thought that might be a Dudleya, but it seems awfully large for that. But in this kind of plant, it would be like a Dudleya or an agave. So I think this might be a Dudleya, but I'm not sure. This one is Bergerocactus amori, which is quite an interesting plant. It's called velvet cactus. I'm not sure why, because it doesn't look very velvety to me. This one is, well, the name's changed. It's now called Stenocereus gummosus, or the galloping cactus. And it's because of this habit. Plants never get higher than maybe 6 feet. They kind of tend to fall over. They don't creep along the ground like the devil cactus farther south. This is Bergerocactus again. And this is very typical of what you can see. So some parts of the desert are just basically stone with plants growing out of them. A lot of it is like this, where you've actually got a lot of plants, lower plant growth, and the cacti are growing out of it. You don't tend to see the smaller cacti in this area. You tend to get the ones that are a little bit bigger. Again, Bergerocactus again, and agave. There's a lot of agaves, and I really don't know them other than to say they're agaves. Now, driving along, it's just from a journey in tourism, it's a fantastic drive, because you end up, this would be on the Pacific coast side, but you're always going by water, either a river or the ocean or the Sea of Cortez. So again, we're going from north to south. And in some areas, it was actually quite verdant, like very green. Now we were there, this was May, right? So this would be kind of like the greener time when the plants would be out flowering. I have no idea how they kept grapevines alive. I didn't see any signs of irrigation or anything like that. This one is the cholla, this silver cholla. Again, it's growing amongst the grass, but it has beautiful flowers and really bright, shiny spines. This one is Myrtlecactus cochow. Now, when I first went through, I thought this was Myrtlecactus geometrizans because that's the only one that I know. But cochow is the only one that, well, there's another Myrtlecactus, but the only one that looks like geometrizans. I never hear anybody trying to use this for grafting stock. It may have something to do with the spines being a little longer than on the other one. This is the full-size plant. Some of the agaves, like we get, the agave americana looks okay, but some of the agaves that were down there were just spectacular. This is again, it's a Myrtlecactus, but there was a fire that went through, and there were other cacti in the area, but it didn't look like it had actually killed it. Now I know with cacti, sometimes it takes a long time before they die, so I don't know if this would survive after a while or if its days are numbered. So it's just some of the typical habitat. Now, some of the taller cacti, there's not a lot of really tall cacti you can find, but the other ones, of course, you had to get out and walk. But as soon as you saw these kind of cacti, you knew it was a good spot to go hunting. This one is Pachycereus shoti, and it's one of the, I'd say 4 or 5 fairly tall cacti. This one though only gets about maybe 7 or 8 feet. Back in my day, it was known as Lophocereus shoti. And this one was interesting because it had this bacteria pattern on it. Now, this is probably about halfway down. This is in Loretto. And just to give you an idea of our prime accommodations, 5-star. It was the best hotel in town. It was actually the only hotel in town. But I thought the newspapers on the windows were extra touch to keep the light out. Now, the owner said that Paul Newman had slept in this room because of the Baja 1000. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's basically a dune buggy race all the way down Baja. And I know he was really big into that. So kind of mammillaria, I'm not sure what it is. Let's call it dioica because that's what they all are. Some of the vistas you had too were just fantastic. Like I mean, I like the woods, but I also like the open aspect of being able to see so much. That's my dad. He was into the cameras as much as me. Now, just so you know, it did rain down there. We did get a bit of rain, but it lasted half an hour and that was it. Now, this is the first shot of the bujum. Some people describe it as an upside down carrot. It's very broad at the base, very slow growing. Like a lot of these plants would be over 100 years old. It's rare, it's endemic, and it only occurs in a very narrow spot in the north of Baja, California. Again, I knew it as Idria columnaris. I don't know if other people recognize that name. And as a photographer, I really like this plant because the silhouette type pictures you can get with it were quite fantastic. This one I think is Ferrocactus. I think it's Acanthodes. But there's about 15 ferrocacti species throughout. Some of them are looking very similar, but this one, because of the distinctive red spines, is why I think it's Acanthodes. There was a lot of nice mammillarias along the way. Like this, what I found quite interesting is some of these ones, even though they've been growing out in the desert for, I don't know, 20 years, they look just as good as the ones that people have been growing in their greenhouse. A lot of them look disheveled, but some of them you come across. And that's, of course, why they're endangered, because these things are just at the side of the road and people would just show up and pick them up. When I was down in San Luis Potosi, in the area of some of the rare cacti, you'd see holes in the ground all over the place where people had gone in and collected them. That's another view of the Ferrocactus acanthodes. It's another kind of mammillaria. This one was actually buried amongst the grass, a bit out of focus. I say that the best way to find these smaller ones actually is to walk barefoot. And then, you know, that's, or what's even better if you can find a friend who will walk, or if you have kids. I haven't thought of that yet. My kids are always a little suspicious of me. They avoid me during moving the cactus out of the basement day. Another Idria, and a lot of them were like this. They just had these weird shapes. Some of them grew straight up, but most of them bent over and then grew straight up again. It's a flower of a yucca, I think. It might be yucca whitley. Not so sure. And lupins, that's one thing before I went down to the deserts. I never associated lupins with desert regions, but they're in a lot of different desert areas I've been. I've seen a lot of lupins. I quite like them. They're a member of the pea family with the traditional pea flowers. Some of the other ones later on are in the pea family, but they don't have the same structure that you learn to associate with it. This is another view. I'm going to find out, like, these are slides that I scanned in from 40 years ago. I hadn't actually seen them for like 30 years. So it's a lot easier now to find information, because back when I started, a lot of the rest of us, I know Dave, there was no internet. So you needed to have a book, and finding books with just sort of the picture stuff to tell you what were non-existent. But now you've got like GBIF and iNaturalist, and you type in agave and all the pictures show up. So it's a lot easier now to identify. What I like about using GBIF or iNaturalist, it'll tell you which ones are in that area. So you don't have to look at all 100 species. You can look at like 10 or 5. Beautiful scenery. That would be Machiocerius in the background there. Oh, now it's called Stenocactus lumosus. These are the leaves of the Fucaria columnaris. Now, I knew it as Idria, but now they moved it into the same family, the same genus as Fucaria. And Fucaria splendens you would know as Ocotillo. And if you've seen ocotillo in the wild, then you would recognize that the leaves and the flowers, I've got some later, look very similar to the ocotillo splendens flower. There's 3 species of Fucaria in Baja. One of them that I know of, one of them is this columnaris, the other is splendens, and there's a Digeti, which is very similar to ocotillo. I've got some pictures later on. Again, this is a landscape, and these are fairly young hydria. And that one in the background could be a Pachycereus springlei. There's 2 really large cacti. There's the Pachycereus springlei, and then there's the Pachycereus pecten arborescens. But the arborescens one is just only in the south. This one's known as a false saguaro because people who see it call it a saguaro, but they're absolutely massive plants. Give me a second here to place myself again. This one is obviously an Echinocereus. I should have been turning the pages of my notes to keep track of where we are. Well, past that. Well, I would ask Dave, because I don't.
It's close to Engelmannii.
Yeah, good point, Dave. I just found my notes, and it is Echinocereus engelmannii, or mannii, depending on how you pronounce it. But it was a beautiful plant itself. Again, it doesn't look like it's growing out in the wild. Now, the difference between film and scanned images, digital can still not capture the detail that exists in the slide. So a lot of these slides, seeing them as actual slide projections, have a lot more pop to the color and to the, and it's not the scanning technique. It's just that the slides have so much more detail. Now this one is the Pachycereus springlei. So people would call this one the saguaro. It tends to branch a little more lower down, but that's my mom at the bottom there. So you can see it's an absolutely massive plant. And some of these things are 200, 300 years old. And I have seen ones bigger than this. And it tends to, I didn't really see much of this down in the south, but in the north, because there's not as much scrubland, they really stand out. There's another Pachycereus springlei, a young one in the background with the Pherocactus acanthodes, Hydria columnaris. It was, once you'd gotten down there, there tended to be these plants that stood out from all the other ones because they were bigger. Now, I didn't have the time to do a lot of like hiking through trying to find a lot of the smaller ones like the Mammillarius or the Echinocereus. There's quite a few of both of those in there. This is a young Hydria columnaris, but this thing could be 20, 50 years old. They're very, very slow growing and endemic. I had one of these that size. This goes back 30 or 40 years. But I had a failure in my greenhouse when I was in Toronto and my ex-wife was pregnant. So unfortunately, it got frozen, which is too bad because it was like that size. And you can see, again, these things like up here you go, well, that tree's going to die. But these, they just bend over and they just keep going. And then sometimes you'd see them and then they would start growing from the bottom again. This one's Yanka Shidegera. It's my dad. He was the one who got me really interested in plants, and I got him interested in cacti. This is another of the Pachycereus shorty. So you can see there's a lot of same plants as we're going south with some variation. Now, once we got sort of to the edge of the where the Hydria columnaris, you broke into this rocky area, and these boulders, I read that they were actually caused by frost, because I couldn't understand where they came from. It's not a glaciated area in the way we get a lot of glaciation up here, or the volcanoes and things like that. But I read that this plain was caused by frost, and it goes on for miles and miles. It's just flat and just covered with these rocks. So if you're looking for plants and cacti, this is a great place. You can just walk and look at the ground. Whereas farther south, it's a little bushier. It's almost like a chaparral. Woods, they're not woods like we get here. The trees might be 15 feet at that much higher. So it's a little harder to go through. But as a photographer, if you're into photography, like I know Jack, for one, is like, it doesn't matter where you look, there was something that you could focus on. Now this one is daughter. We do get that up here as well. It's Cuscata wiechi, and it's parasitic. So it doesn't have any roots. It actually attaches to the plant and takes all its energy from the plants. And I've seen this in many places through Latin America and South America. Solanum, it's related to our deadly nightshade, Solanum nigrum, that we have up here. Beautiful blue flowers. There's several species of Solanum down there. So again, I would love to have had time to just walk like across there and up through the hills. As I said, just cacti, there's 130 different species. So it's like a dream place to look through. This was the typical road that we traveled down. Now back then, as I said, it was basically a dirt road. Now I'm sure it's paved, but it was a good quality, and you didn't have to worry about traffic. It's like we would be at the side of the road for an hour and you wouldn't see a single car go by. It'd just be me and my dad looking at cacti, and my mom sitting in the car at 90 degrees with no air conditioning. She was not happy. I told this story before, but when my parents went down, my mom wanted to join me, and I said, Mom, I'm going to look at cacti. I'm going to stop and take a picture of every single cactus that I see. She went, oh, that's fine. I don't think she believed me. But we got down there, and my dad was really interested as well. But when we came back, we told the story two different ways. I would tell her friends about how I warned her before she went down there, and then she complained. And she said, yeah, but then they would find a cactus, and then they would sit down by the cactus. Then they'd take 20 pictures of it, and then they would look at it from every direction. Then they would sit there for 20 minutes talking about the cactus while I was sitting in the car. She doesn't find this funny, this idea. This would be, I think it's a seedling from, it's a Ferrocactus for sure. Might be Acanthodes, because they were fairly common down there. Now this one, I have a better sense it might be Dioica, because it has the small yellow flowers as opposed to sort of the bright red flowers that I tend to associate with it. Now when I went to Baja this last time around, they didn't have flowers, they just had fruit, but the fruit looks very similar in a lot of the different species. Now this is a plant, this is, I had three favorite plants that I really wanted to see. And this one is called the wax plant, or Candelia, and it's in the Euphorbiaceae, and it just has this fantastic weird flower. I never dissected the flower, but I would really like to see what those various pieces are relative to what I call a typical one. I was actually quite pleased with, even though I say film is better, I was quite pleased with how well the scans worked in terms of picking up the detail and the color. Now this is the typical plant itself. Now this one, they grow it in some places in the Southwest states in the garden, because you can just break off a piece and stick it in the ground. I did have a seedling that was growing, but it didn't last more than a few months. So I'll have to try that one again because it's a plant I would really love to have and really get it to flower. That's probably Cactus pringleyi in the background there. Now this one is the flower of the, now if you look at it, I don't know how familiar you are with ocotillo flowers, but if you look at it, you'd say, yeah, it should be in the same genus just from looking at it from a distance. You know, you'd have to dissect it to know for sure, but there's a lot of similarities with it. Although I liked it having its own name. In general, I tend to be somewhere between the lumpers and the splitters. Now this one I don't know for sure, but I think this one is creosote, Laria tridentata, which is a common plant that's scattered throughout Baja and a lot of other places I've traveled. But unfortunately, I didn't write it down and I can't see the detail of the leaves and the flowers to know for sure. Another dioica. The ferrocacti, I didn't really appreciate the flower buds because up here I never see flower buds. But a lot of them have these brilliant red to them, in some cases almost a purple hue. Now, acanthodes actually, even though it's the ferrocactus, I don't know if you know it, some of the ferrocacti, I've seen them in the wild like 8 feet high. They get fairly big and fairly wide across as well, like a couple feet. Now, I think this one is Echinocerius maritimus. I don't know if Dave would be able to object to that or not.
Sounds good to me.
All right, it's a done deal. Now this one is a plant that I really, really like. It's called Mesembryanthemum crystallinum and also called ice plant. Now this is growing on virtual pure sand. It's a mound of sand. So it's kind of a ground cover one. But you'll see, when you see more of the plant, you'll see where they got the name ice plant and crystallinum. But fantastic flowers. And I've got a close-up of it. I actually printed this one out as a poster to give to my dad way back when. But here you can really see why it's called crystallinum or ice plant. The epidermal cells, the water retention. It also, I presume, gives some protection from the sun as well. But when you were looking at these and if the sun glinted on them, like the whole area would just kind of light up. So again, one of my top 3 plants. Now, I don't remember how common it was. We did see it in 2 or 3 places. Some of the other plants I showed you will extend all the way down to La Paz. This one was kind of more in the central area. Now, this one wasn't actually listed in Tobin's book, so I didn't extract it until from GBIF, but I will go back and get that. I found this interesting. They just used some old yuccas to make fence posts. It's kind of a good idea out there because it's a living fence post. And again, you can see the crystallinum just going on for forever through this area. And as I said, it's not all dry. There were some oases down there with actual palm trees and a lot of water like this. Well, this is kind of the biggest lake that we saw. But it's not totally dry, and there are those oases scattered throughout. Now, one of the trees I kind of like, and I haven't learned to distinguish between them all, but there's Bursera, Pachycormus, Jatropha, and they have the name, people call them elephant tree. I think this one is Bursera because the Pachycormus, I think, has a lighter bark. Again, I do plan on going back through and trying to figure out what some of these are because now I have the resources. Before I just had the brick of Wiggins, and he had no pictures, good illustrations, but it's a lot easier if you can look at some of the photos.
So when's the summer grow? Pachycormus is winter grow.
I don't know that. Now, we had looked at Lothosarius, or now it's called Pachycereus shoti earlier. That was the one that had the bacteria growing on it. But when they mature, they get what's a cephalium. Now, it's not a cephalium like Melocactus, but you will have these plants, and some of them will be like 8 feet tall, and the top 1.5 or 2 feet will have this bristly cephalium on top of it. These were not common, but they were very distinctive. There was no other cactus in Baja that looked like this at all. I love being in Baja. I wish I was there now, nothing personal. It might be a while though. We were gonna go back 2 years ago, but of course that was when COVID hit. We haven't gone anywhere. This is actually my first outing, really, since, yeah. But that's because you guys are special.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I thought so. Anyways, it's an Asteraceae, obviously some sort of sunflower. Again, I found sunflowers all through Mexico, Central, South America. Now, this one is different from the Pachycereus pringlei, which we had looked at, and they talk about it as being an upside down spider. So it's organ pipe cactus, and that is the name for it. It used to be called the Merocereus thurberry. They don't get as tall, maybe 15 feet, and they're characterized by these pipes sticking up. This is a fairly old plant though, and the fruit is quite edible. I've got some shots of that later on. This is a young specimen. Now, if you were comparing it to, say, pringlei looks almost grayer, and the spines are much more dense than they are on the Stenocereus thurberry. Cactus with fruit. All right. Yeah, the last cactus might have been peninsulae, but I'm not 100% sure. Again, it's nice if you can see the fruit and then the flower, because quite often it's the two together that allow you to identify it, as well as the spines and the kind of spines. This one is called fairy duster, Calliandra californica. Now, this one is actually in the pea family. Now, most people, when they look at the pea family, they think of the peas that we get up here, peas and beans and those kind of legumes. This would be like acacia would be this kind. And there's a group of them called, it's mimosas. You may have seen the mimosa sensitive plant that has similar type flowers. But this one is in the pea family. And the acacia types are characterized by these multipinnate leaves and these duster type plants. Those will all be stamens, so the male reproductive parts. Now there's a couple different poppies. I now have the ability to find out what they are, but for now we just call this desert poppy. The nice thing about traveling with people who don't know plants is I can call them whatever I want. My favorite was always calling them Plantus greenus, but that usually gave it away. Now, a lot of people who aren't into cacti, succulents, deserts, and plants, they would find this boring, but I find it just fascinating going through this area. And I saw my first wild cactus 50 years ago, and I found it fascinating because I'd only seen them like at Woolworths, you know, the little pots, that these things actually grew in the wild and like in places you couldn't expect anything to grow. That would be another one of those elephant trees. Some form of Echinocereus. Now this is kind of what I expected the Echinocereus to all look like, you know, a little hard denbot. But hanging in there. No, you can't tell. Some of these are the other Pachyceres starting to show up. So this one, it would be probably Pachyceres pringlet, and you can see how it has that almost grayish tinge to it. Now, as it gets older, it's not quite as blue, but because of the spines, like if you have a seedling 10, 20 years old, you see the spines more than you see the actual ribs. This would be the Sea of Cortez. So before I showed you some of the water would have been more on the Pacific side, the ocean. And as you can see, it's not very far across they call it Sea of Cortez. It's not that big, but the water, this is color actually is, sometimes it's even a deeper blue or blue-green than this. Again, another Pachyceres pringlet. Some sort of choya in the background there. Now this one I also liked. It's called, they call it palo blanco, blanco being white. And for obvious reasons, it's Lysiodoma candida, candida, I guess in English. And I saw them scattered throughout as I got farther south, and they're actually fantastic looking plants. Hang on, I've got to unzoom it before it lets me move it. There we go. So now off the coast, as I mentioned, especially there's some islands on the ocean side, but the Sea of Cortez, they have a lot of these small islands, and on them, I'd like to get out and go to some of them. Like there's a Cactus diggeti, which only grows on the islands off the coast here. So they're kind of an ecological endemic paradise. Now this would be the young plant of the Pachyceres pringlet that I was mentioning. You can see how you see the spines more than anything else. And in the middle of the desert, they had wheat fields. Don't ask me why. But obviously, it must grow. I don't know if it's hard done by. I don't know if they do any irrigation. Now, this again is going back 40 years ago. Now, I don't know what this one is. It's possibly the bean family, and not just because it has pods, but typically the acacias and the mimosas, they have these pods. This is kind of nice. You combine. It's got the I think it's I don't remember which of the elephant trees this is, and then the choya and another Pachyceres. And if you're ever traveling through the desert and you want to get your pictures spectacular, the best time is in the morning and in the evening, because then you get the shadowing from the sun. If I'd taken the same picture in the middle of the day, you wouldn't have gotten that sort of that really sharp quality jumping out. Now these are all taken from slides with scans. Now I have a fairly specialized setup, both in terms of hardware. I have hardware that actually has infrared, so it recognizes scratches and dust, and then the software gets rid of them. So the original side, that blue, would have been covered with little specks. So this was the end of the north to south as far as La Paz, and La Paz is about 2/3 of the way through. So to drive that with some stops along the way would be about 2 days, but you do have fine accommodations like in Loreto where you can spend the night. Well, actually, we had to spend more than a night because they had run out of gas in the town. There were no gas stations basically for a day. There's actually nothing for a day, the plant. So I quite liked it. Now, that was 40 years ago. Since then, on the coast, they've learned that you can't make money off cacti, but you can off of resorts. So they are setting up a lot more resorts in Mexico. I know the coastal area, and people like these areas because they're hot, they're dry. So now, about 3 years ago, Sue and I went down to Los Cabos, and there's Cabos San Lucas, Cabos San Jose, but Los Cabos is sort of that southern area. It's where, if you ever been to Cabos, it's a fun place to go. Now, Sue said I picked it because of the cacti, and the picture of the hotel showed about a dozen cacti along the driveway, and she knows me fairly well because which hotel has the most cacti. So there's not as many slides here because I only had about a day. I did a quick loop up through, but just to give you some idea of the differences. Now this one's Cactus peninsula. It's a fairly common one down there. And that's in town. Now, this was a roundabout. And Sue went for a massage, an hour-long massage, and just down the road from it, I spent an hour just in this roundabout, looking at the cacti and taking pictures. There was just so many. There was well, I've got some other pictures, closer up pictures later on. Now, this is some kind of, excuse me, some kind of a Asclepias. So it's basically a milkweed. There's about half a dozen species growing there. It's fairly succulent. The stems are. Solanum, beautiful, vibrant blue. Now these ones were actually like bushes. They were 8-10 feet high bushes. This is a cactus woodpecker, desert woodpecker. Looks very similar to our flickers that we get up here. And near Cabos, this is the famous arch. You get on a boat, you go out. It's a lot of fun. We went on a glass bottom boat, so you got to see all the fish and the seals. They learn that the boats need food, so when the fishermen come back, you'll see the seals jumping up on the boat to try and get whatever leftover bait there is. I highly recommend just going to Los Cabos. It's one of those places where you can get the all-inclusive tours. Now this one is Fucaria, but this one's Digeti, so it's different from Splendens because you can see it's got a bit of a trunk to it. Whereas when you see Ocotillo, the Fucaria Splendens, the branches almost come straight out of the ground. They have a little bit of a stem, but it's not as pronounced as these. These are much more bush-like. And again, when you look at the leaves and you look at the flowers and you think back to the bujum tree and to Ocotillo, they look very similar. Like if someone showed me a picture of this, well, because it's branching, I might know what it is. But if they showed the flower and the leaves, you wouldn't really be able to distinguish them easily. This one is another mimosi, the fairy duster type. And you can see it's got those typical leaves, the highly pinnated type leaves. Now the landscape down there is very different. The mountains were much closer to the road, and it's all super highway, 4 lanes in some places. Mountains are much closer, but you can see there's a lot more forest. Now the forest is only about 10 or 12 feet high. Now the Pachycereus that you see scattered out is probably Pachycereus pecten aboriginum. But this was typical all the way up to La Paz and back. This is the kind of scenery. Now it made it more difficult to walk around because there was a lot more going on. But luckily the tall cacti stood out, so you know where to stop and look. But this was very typical of what I saw driving north. Now this one is the organ pipe cactus, and the flowers are very distinctive. The way they stick out with that bright red, you can even see them from a distance. Now, as I said, the fruit are hardly edible. If you're looking at the Pachycereus, the fruit are much more spiny, where you can't even see them. The fruit. This was just at a well, a roadside fruit market, like $5 for 2 or 3 of these things. So they're quite tasty. Of course, up here I wouldn't eat them. I'd just try and get all the seeds out. So this is just the leaves from one of the elephant trees. They all have that typical scaly bark. Another mammillaria, this one with the fruit, because I was there in December, whereas the first trip I was there in the spring. Now, you can't see it, but down here where my finger's pointing, that's where the plant is. So this was an area where it was easy to find because I just walked through. And typically, I found the plants that were out in the open because I didn't tend to walk through the bush. In some ways, I find mammillarias more spectacular when they're in fruit than when they're in flower, unless they're one of the ones like the with the really bigger flowers. This would be probably Cactus peninsulae. Another Oregon pipe cactus. You can see it's got that distinctive upside down spider look to it. This is another one of those Palo Blancos, fascinating plants. The bark. Just typical landscape, driving north up to La Paz and back down again. Now there's a place I would highly recommend. It's called the Cactus Sanctuary. And there's thousands and thousands of cacti, but it's like they're shoulder to shoulder. Walking through it, you had to follow the path. You couldn't have cut through them. It's just cacti would grow anywhere. I even saw them growing on roofs, like people had planted them. They would be growing up on the roofs of houses. Now this is the fruit of the Pachysarius pectin arboretum, and you can see how it's much spinier. Now, the first time I went down, boy, that was a mistake. I crossed over from the mainland at La Paz, and I collected one of these, and I had it in my back, and we got stopped. You'd be driving down the road, and a couple soldiers with machine guns would just step out in front of you and ask you to stop, which we did. But the soldier decided to search the car, and before I could stop him, he shoved his hand into the back seat, and he filled his hand with spines, and he was not happy. Now, I didn't understand the words he was saying, but yeah, and oh, he searched everything. He was opening my film containers, and his partner kept saying, "They're just tourists, let them go." And my partner who I was with, she said she didn't want to spend the rest of her life in a Mexican jail. I found it amusing, but she didn't. So this is what it looked like walking through. There was paths through, but they were just packed in there. And they were either like the Oregon pipe or the Pachysarius. Some of the local wildlife. I don't know if it's the same, but I called it a turkey vulture because that's what we have up here. Now, I don't know if, like up here, if you've got a maple forest, you'll see a lot of young maple saplings, and they don't grow until the big trees fall over. And there was a lot of areas where I saw a lot of these, and they all seem to be about the same height. So I don't know if it's the same thing, where they stay that height, the bigger plants fall over, and they get a little more light, and then they grow up. So I drove up sort of the Sea of Cortez side, but you don't actually get to the ocean much, just a little bit. And then I turned around and drove down the Western Pacific side, which is where this is. Again, is typical. This was like hours and hours of the same sort of scenery. Now this I actually took a whole bunch of pictures and stuck them together, so I haven't finished the blue sky, but this is what you look at when you stop, just miles and miles of cacti. And They look like they go on for miles every which way you look. Again, this is by the hotel, and as I said, Sue wasn't wrong. I did pick it because of the plants. This was the roundabout, like it's just fascinating. You stop your car, but Sue said the people driving by must have wondered because I was there for like an hour with a camera, just taking pictures. I don't know if this looks a bit like Wislesny, but I'm not 100% sure, but I just love the color. This was taken with camera people, a D750 DSLR, so you can really zoom in and see the detail inside. And one of the things I really liked about wandering there, people had these things as just potted plants, the way we would have geraniums. They had like this is Pachypodium lemuri, and like what it would cost us to have one of these up here if we could find a place that would sell it. And I think that's the end.